our second session on record keeping, specifically for Northern Ireland. I think it now feels that I've got the other half of Northern Ireland here today. Another really record-breaking, if I can say that, turnout today. So thank you. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for taking time out of your busy work week to listen in. You're all very welcome indeed. Thank you too for submitting your questions in advance as well, many of which we will answer in our session, but we will have a Q&A running in the background as well. So my colleagues are there and hopefully be able to answer some of your questions if you don't get to them. Now you'll get a copy of the slides after the event, and we are recording our session so you can watch it all over again if you're so inclined. You'll see cameras and mics are turned off, and that's just due to the volume of our participants. I do plan to use Slido for a bit of interaction, so please do open up slido.com and be ready for that as well for me. And we always do appreciate people taking the time out of their busy schedules to join us, and I think it's always good just to start with why we're here. But I think particularly today, I feel I need to clarify from the outset just why it is that we're doing the session today. So as you can tell from my County Antrim accent, I am from Northern Ireland, working for the HCPC. But up until a couple of years ago, I was a registered physio working in our NHS, and I know some of my ex-colleagues are on the call this morning. So I'm well aware record keeping has been forefront in our minds because, just like us, things don't stay the same. And chances are, wherever you work, your method of record keeping has probably changed over the years. So I wanted to do this session just by way of support, really to refresh everybody's understanding of what the HCPC requirements are in relation to your record keeping. And that, of course, can be found in your standards. Now, I know not everyone on the call does work for the NHS, and not everybody's using Encompass. But remember, the HCPC standards, they're no different, whether you're using Encompass or paper records or a different system, whatever it is. And to be clear, we're not dictating that everybody needs to use electronic records either, but we do expect you to apply the standards to your context. So you do need to be familiar with them to know how you're going to do that. And that's what I want to help you with today. Now, as with all our standards, whether they're about record keeping, scope of practice, maybe how you document consent, or your CPD requirements, they're high level. They don't specify how you fulfill that standard. And I know that that can be frustrating, especially for managers. And we acknowledge that maybe it would sometimes be easier if we just, said, for example, records must be completed within 48 hours. But that's simply not really possible with the range of contexts that our registrants work in. Our standards are, however, outcome focused, and you need to use your professional judgment as to how you get to that outcome. And that will obviously be determined by factors like your profession or your job role, your professional body guidelines will be there too, your organisation's policies, and of course now Encompass itself. So it's not within our remit to dictate specifics to you. However, if that is needed, then discuss it within your organisations or your professional bodies and set the specific standards that you need yourself. We do, however, have guidance on some particular issues like confidentiality and consent, and that can maybe help you as well to make informed and reasonable decisions relating to these standards or to these issues in line with our standards. Now, many of the questions that we got did relate to processes with Encompass, like how do you record safeguarding concerns? And I'm sorry, I can't answer those particular questions which would fall outside of our remit, but I acknowledge we did get a number like that. They are relevant questions. You need answers to them. So I have been in contact with your chief AHP information officers and your Encompass leads, and I've shared your questions, and I know that they're looking at what they can do to address them. In the meantime, they suggest that you do get in touch with your line managers, your digital leads, your AHP leads, or themselves within your trusts and raise those concerns or get guidance from the trust protocol. Now, some other questions were more profession specific, which you could raise with your professional body and maybe cover them at your profession specific meetings. But I suggest you get together and share what insights you have across the departments, across trusts, and because no doubt if you have those questions, chances are others have them or have had them, and somebody may well have the answers too. So this is just what today's about. I'm going to take you through the standards and record keeping, just reminding you why records need to be accurate and timely, and implications of poor record keeping as well, and identify some of the factors that can impact on record keeping and maybe how to manage these. Now, just to set it in context, let me remind you of why the regulator cares so much about your record keeping. So remember, we're the regulator for 15 different professions, and that's a role that's established by statute. It's an act of Parliament. And this order clearly sets out our overriding objective, which is to protect the public. And of course, the public's all of us. And our key responsibilities are to protect, promote, maintain the health, safety and well-being of the public, promote and maintain public confidence in the professions that we regulate, and promote and maintain proper professional standards and conduct for the professions that we regulate. Now, if I asked you what the HCPC role is, I imagine most of you would mention quality assuring education, setting standards, keeping a register, and of course taking action to protect the public through fitness to practice. And that's true. But our current approach to regulation is more upstream. It's getting in upstream, being more preventative rather than reactive, rather a bit like healthcare itself. And that gives us an opportunity for greater influence, greater collaboration and support with our stakeholders like yourselves today. And we aim to understand the challenges that you're facing and do what we can to remove or mitigate those challenges through learning from the information that we hear from you and from data and insights that we gather ourselves in the course of our work, such as looking at any patterns to concerns that are coming into us. And then we use that learning to support you to provide good quality care and overcome the barriers that you might have to meeting the standards. And that's where my role in Northern Ireland comes in. It's all about doing workshops and webinars in Northern Ireland with managers and registrants and students as well to help embed the standards in day-to-day work. And we talk about things like culture, raising and listening to concerns, maybe professionalism, scope of practice, record keeping, and many others. And it's a two-way process as I listen to the challenges that you're facing in relation to these things as well. So that was just a little plug. Do get in contact with me if you would like to discuss any of these things or for me to come out to your place of work. Now, when I was on the HCPC register, my biggest challenge in achieving the standards was having a working knowledge of them. So here we go with our first question here. It's a simple question. It's a simple yes, no answer. See if it works on Slido. Please tell me honestly, and there's no names against the yeses or the nos. Have you read the standards in the last 2 years? So somebody's got us off to a flying start already. Thank you. Have you read the standards in the last 2 years? We've got a bit of a mixture there, and I know it's impossible to remember everything that's in the standards, but it is good to have a working knowledge of them. And many of them are common sense, but there will be some points in them that you may not have appreciated, particularly following the updates that we've had. So I always encourage managers or team leaders to maybe take one of them and go over them at staff meetings, particularly if you're discussing something like if there's been a learning incident and you're discussing how it was handled. So looking up the standards around duty of candour, that can really help to reassure staff that they're doing what is expected. And that's actually the thing that staff often say to me, I just want to know that I'm doing the right thing. And it's the same with record keeping. We'll look at what they say, and where you're unsure how to apply these in very specific contexts, then do seek advice about that. So we're nearly a 50-50 split here. So that's great. Thank you for voting there. And it's quite easy to get in contact there using Slido. So please, as we go along, fastest fingers on the button. So that's our little plan, why we make records, what the standards say, and some of the implications. And then we'll look at some of the resources as well. So just very quickly, why do we make records? And I know that for many, a lot of this will be stating the obvious. But the more we can I just want to get you thinking for yourself, why do you make records in the first place? And there's actually quite a lot of different reasons. So legally is obviously one, and that comes up quite often. First go, show what has happened in the session. Yes, and it's your accountability as well. We've got protection, legal requirements. Yes, most people are saying legally, so that's great. Thank you. Audit trail, quality of care. Thank you. Yes. Reminding us of our treatments. and our progress and our plan going forwards, continuity of care. Put my ideas down, sharing information, yes. And it helps us to remember legal, legal, legal. Records action, looking back, transition of care, yes. Yep, map clinical journey. Okay, so lots of different reasons in there. I'm just going to move on. Sorry if you're in the middle of typing. Apologies for that. But you can see here a whole list of reasons. And of course, our reasons for making records, it hasn't changed just because we're maybe changing how we're doing it. So, as you've said, they're there to safeguard continuity of care. So you're providing a record of what's been done. And that's essential, particularly for those of us whose memories are not as good. Quite a few people have mentioned memories there. But it also gives information to our colleagues as well who are involved in the care and treatment. And really they ensure that the service users are receiving the appropriate treatment and that's in their best interest. A lot of you mentioned legal requirements, and we're thinking as well about responding to freedom of information or subject access requests as well. Don't think anybody mentioned evidence of your decision-making process, and that's very helpful. It's helpful for yourself as maybe you come back to review your patient, or if somebody else is required to review them. And that, of course, that could include your inquests and public inquiries as well. They also can safeguard vulnerable people, so sometimes records might help to evidence any neglect or the harm of a vulnerable service user. And then also in research and learning. Now, what records you need to keep and in what format or for how long, that's going to vary depending on the setting that you're working in and the subject matter of your records as well. And again, your organisation, your professional body will give you guidance in relation to the specifics on that. Who might use our records? Again, there's a number of different people that might be using our records. So again, if you wouldn't mind just getting involved and just typing who are all the different people you can think of might be using records, because of course it's not just ourselves. Other professionals, and there's patients coming in there now too. Other professionals, yeah. Anybody else other than just other health professionals and our colleagues? Solicitors, yeah. Okay, so we're getting courts and solicitors and other professionals, and I think one person mentioned the patients there as well. Complaints department too. And I think it's useful just to remember it's not just ourselves, particularly when you get initiatives like the My Care app. Your records are going to be much more accessible to your service user and their families. A few people mentioned there, and of course there'll still be the freedom of information requests. Other healthcare professionals, you know that, your internal colleagues, external health professionals as well. And I know that with Encompass, many of you have shared concerns about how many more people could be accessing your records. And does that have any implications for what you include? Well, you include what you need to. And if there are maybe concerns about inappropriate access, that may be more of a systems query. But you've got to include what you need to include as usual. Notes can be requested in relation to a case that comes before the courts, and that can be several years after the event, of course. And I've had personal experience of my notes being involved in a court case many years after the event. And the fact that the expert witness could actually deduce my clinical reasoning from what actually were quite scant notes, I have to say, at that time, that was my saving grace. So I certainly had a much higher regard for notes and the importance of quality notes after that incident. Now, social services as well, and the Department of Work and Pensions might also request access to your records. And records and notes could also be used in research and data. And again, my records were used in some research around the topic of cholera equina at a time. And the regulator, now, I have included regulator there, but not routinely, but certainly may request to see records or notes where a concern is raised in relation to your record keeping. But the key to remember, I think, is we keep notes not because we have to, not because it's a legal duty, but it is to keep the public safe. So let's look at these standards here. And we published 4 sets of standards, and they all link together, but the 2 that we're focusing on today are the middle 2 there, are standards of proficiency and standards of conduct, performance and ethics. Now, you declare that you know and you're abiding by the standards when you register and when you re-register with us every 2 years. And just as you become more experienced and you develop your practice, your profession is also changing and it's developing as well. And it creates changes in the way that you practice. So, for example, you're transitioning from paper records to digital records at the minute, or at least many of you are. And your CPD then is what helps you to adapt and keep pace with those changes and those advancements as well. So let's have a look at them. Record keeping is mentioned in both the Standard of Conduct, Performance and Ethics and the Standard of Proficiency, and they complement each other, endorsing really that record keeping, it's not just a skill, a professional skill that you need, but it's also a behaviour that is expected of you. So looking here at Standard 10.1, it reinforces that you must keep full, clear and accurate records for everyone you care for, treat or provide other services to. So the emphasis here is that our service users are receiving appropriate treatment that is in their best interest. What makes a record full in relation to their treatment then? And that may vary depending on context, but you will want to consider if it contains the information required to fulfill its purpose. Will it provide continuity of care, the best treatment for the patient? Is there evidence of your decision making? And that might include a detailed assessment, the analysis of what you found and what your plan going forward is. Now the question came up, does that require you to write out your past medical history, which is already included with Encompass? And the advice I've been given is that there's no need to duplicate past medical history into multiple areas of the notes, because this leads to note bloat. It's a great phrase. But it's obviously important that you review prior entries and that you've referenced this and you update or you add anything new that's needed. And if there is a data field specifically there to identify that past medical history has been reviewed, then you use this. Otherwise, just make sure that you have evidenced it somewhere. And then going on, are they clear? And there's plenty of cases relating to harm caused by poor handwriting, particularly in relation to medicines, but not just that alone. But clear also means lacking ambiguity as well. And then are they accurate? Deliberately falsifying records is a serious issue related to somebody's character, and it will be taken seriously. So inadvertently recording something incorrectly, that could be an issue if it occurs repeatedly or it causes a significant error because safeguards haven't been followed. Now you're expected to use your professional judgment about what is included, but you should also use your professional judgment about what not to include. So stating the previous therapist failed to provide adequate instruction, or maybe what a patient said they didn't receive without first checking with the therapist, wouldn't be very professional. And I think we all know subjective interpretations about things should also be avoided. Now, the standards on state that they should be completed promptly and as soon as possible after providing care, treatment, or other services. And it's back to patient safety, because your prompt record will ensure continuity of care and probably accuracy as well. And depending on your working context, your records may need to be shared with colleagues as soon as possible after care and treatment. And Encompass users may also be aware of the impact of somebody not getting letters sent off in a timely fashion, which can slow others up or disrupt the flow. I've heard these comments being made. Things like failing maybe to close down a referral after discharge. That used to just impact maybe your filing cabinet, your bulging filing cabinet, but now it may impact others as well, and actually add an increased burden on yourself and more admin time too. And then, of course, protecting them from loss, damage, and inappropriate access. It is your responsibility to ensure the confidentiality of your records at all times. And we have a confidentiality document as well to support this aspect of your care. Now, where it used to be making sure the filing cabinets were locked, it's now making sure our screens are locked, and just being aware of things like somebody looking over your shoulder, you're reading an MRI report, and your colleague beside you is struggling to find that patient a free slot to book them in for another 6 weeks. But you need to be aware of what they're looking at. And you'll recognise all these are bad practices, but they're also violations of your standards, and that's because we could potentially cause patient harm if we're not fulfilling these. They may sometimes be inconvenient or even considered pedantic, but do remember they are patient safety issues here. And then the standards of proficiency. They highlight our records are kept and managed in accordance with applicable legislation, protocols and guidelines, and that we use digital record keeping tools where that's required. So what might these include? Well, as record keeping practice differs depending on where you work and what your profession is, your employer and your professional body, your trade union, will give you the best specific guidance. And you can also get advice from the Information Commissioner's Office and they are the UK Authority on Information Rights and Data Protection. So, for example, data protection requirements mean that we should only take or hold information that we require for the service we deliver. So that has implications for what we store and how long we store it as well. And the Department of Health, you probably know, have a document on good management, good records too, which is relevant to Northern Ireland. So do always keep in mind the legal requirements for data protection and freedom of information and subject access requests as well. There's a lot to think about. So if you're not sure, check with your manager that your notes meet any legal requirements, and do seek advice if you're self-employed and you're not quite sure. And I think, just imagine, would you be happy for your notes to be before the courts? And if not, then thinking about that. And I know the Clinical Education Centre as well in Belfast runs some good record keeping courses there, which are very informative as well. Now, just by way of example, you can see the Southern Trust Guide to Handling Information here on the screen. Now remember, your own department may also have some guidance as well, even more specific to your role. If you work privately, it is important to establish clear processes for this aspect of your service, just as you would for infection control or for gaining consent. All the things that support your service, and they're absolutely necessary to keep both you and your clients safe. So, for example, on things like transporting records, if you have to take them home, how do you transport them? Is it in the boot? Is it on a locked carrier? They mustn't stay in the car overnight, and that all relates to Standard 9.2. That's your management of records. Remember, they're at their most vulnerable when they're on the go, and that's whether that's digital, on a device, or a paper copy. So it is really important that you follow all protocols and you raise issues if you need to. So our standards will expect that you know the details and you follow them in these protocols. And remember, sometimes we read records and our thoughts immediately go to patient assessment or treatment notes and how we complete and store them. But the term records also include discharge letters, referrals, even work diaries. So the legislation or good guidelines that our standards allude to will include things like the Department of Health Good Management and Good Records Retention and Disposal Schedule. So there's a certain length of time records are to be stored for, and then they must be destroyed correctly. And how that's done with Encompass is probably an example of a good question for your digital leads. Now, many of the professional bodies have guidance as well. They've got guidance documents on record keeping, which will be specific to your own profession, and that might include a checklist of what you need to think through. At the HCPC, we do not provide such a checklist because we regulate 15 different professional groups, 33 titles, and each of them work in quite a variety of contexts. So again, it would be inappropriate to stipulate specifics like that, but your professional body will be that bit more specific. So if you haven't read your professional body's guidance, then I would recommend that might be a wee follow-up to do after today. Now, the last point in Standard 9, I've included it here alongside the other standards of proficiency that relate to record keeping, which came in with the last updates back in September 2023. And they highlight the concepts that confidentiality and consent extend to all mediums. Also, that we need to be using digital technologies that are appropriate to our practice, and that includes your digital record keeping. And that requires to change our practice as needed to take account of the change in context. And change is never easy, particularly if you're experiencing difficulties either with the system itself or with maybe your department infrastructure or your own digital skills. One of my colleagues of a similar era to myself recognised that the younger generation had adapted significantly quicker to Encompass than she had, but she got there eventually. So it's important to ask for help and not to bury your head in the sand. It's also important not to bury your head in your records as well when you're trying to get to grips with it, as another one of my colleagues mentioned to me just last week. And a deterioration in record keeping is often the first sign of disengagement by a staff member, indicating something else could be going on. So it's important not to ignore it. And peers may be the first to notice this before managers do. And if that's the case, it's important not to simply roll your eyes and accept, well, that's just them, but actually raise it with your colleague in the first instance, and further if you need to. This is an act of kindness, but it's also fulfilment of Standard 7, which states you must report any concerns about the safety or the well-being of service users promptly and appropriately. Not keeping accurate and timely records could become a patient safety issue, as crucial information might be missed or mightn't be passed on to others. But I would add, it is important to be empathetic when you are considering instances and scenarios that may have resulted in record keeping that falls below the standard expected. As we know, there may be mitigating factors that impact on an individual or a service's ability to maintain the required standard of record keeping. It is suggested that, as is the case generally when raising a concern, an empathetic and supportive approach rather than a blame culture should be adopted. Now, some of those mitigating factors might be where you're facing time constraints or targets, meaning that you struggle to find time to keep record promptly, particularly when services are under pressure. Changes to services can be one of the examples. And occasionally there can be changes to a service, like for example we had during COVID, which have an impact on job roles and procedures. So the flexibility in our standards actually enables registrants to respond to their changing operational demands and working patterns as is required. This could mean a departure maybe from normal record keeping procedures for you, but you do need to ensure that this doesn't have any adverse impact on the service delivery or the safety and the well-being of service users. Now, some staff may need additional support, additional learning needs, for example, and inclusion factors. They need to be considered, and ensure staff with additional support needs are appropriately supported as well, with the many and the varied reasons people don't always get their notes written up on time, and that could be health conditions, can impact menopause, can impact, and certainly after the first webinar, a registrant with MS got in touch with me just to say how Encompass had added another layer of difficulty for her. So managers really need to be aware of this as well. So if you have concerns about your own ability to keep records, keep accurate records, whether in relation to the system itself or to your own ability to find the time to get the records completed, you should raise it first with your line manager or with your supervisor. And if necessary, if you have to, you can raise it more formally with your employer or with your trade union or your professional body. Ultimately, record keeping does remain an important part of your practice, and it must be maintained. Now we'll look at some case studies here. Some of you may be familiar with this report in relation to the neurology inquiry here in Northern Ireland, and in the section under Making Care Safer, we find that poor record keeping was one of the issues specifically identified in the report. So we know that we need to think about these cases and how important our record keeping is in relation to patient safety. So have a read through this here. Sam is a locum dietitian for an NHS mental health trust within an adult community team. And after approximately a month of working in the service, several team members have identified concerns regarding the treatment Sam has provided to patients. And this includes alleged concerns that Sam has failed to record the names and/or NHS numbers on each page of notes relating to 15 patients. Now, these, along with other concerns around clinical reasoning skills and treatment advice, are collated by a team member and raised collectively with the HCPC as a completed referral. Subsequent information was sought by the HCPC to bring the case to a hearing. Now, you could take the likes of this case back to your teams who aren't here and discuss in more detail, and I've actually included just some questions that you could do. You could raise these questions with your team if you wanted. Now, we often see record keeping is not an issue raised to us in isolation. We'll often see it along with other concerns like poor clinical care or maybe unmanaged health conditions that are affecting the ability to keep records, or dishonesty and failures in the duty of candour where records have been covered up or they've been altered after the incident or even deleted on purpose. And although other concerns were raised here, the chief concern was regarding poor record keeping, where Sam didn't record the names and the numbers on multiple patient records. And of course, if you use electronic records, this may seem totally irrelevant, but I think just consider the principle of omitting to include basic information. And I've certainly seen patients' names and addresses entered into a system rather than the H&C number, just purely out of convenience, and then the wrong patient record being used because there could be two same names living at the same address, but two different people. So this is based on an actual case. The case was referred to the HCPC, and you can see the the standards there that we're thinking about. The registrant had failed to record the names and the numbers on each page of notes relating to 15 patients. The panel concluded, well, the registrant knew that they should have been doing this, but had failed to do so. The panel noted that they had been provided with a specific induction document setting out the importance of this as well. And they said failing to record basic patient details carried a risk of misidentification, data mismanagement, treatment confusion, and a potential breach of confidentiality. And they said it was not a one-off error or omission, but it was repeated on numerous occasions. So the sanctions here was a conditions of practice order being imposed, and that included things like specific training, working only in a team of dietitians, not independently, and with supervision for a period of time. And here's another one. So Linda is a speech and language therapist with 15 years experience working in the NHS. She is the lead speech and language therapist in a multidisciplinary team with management responsibilities for 3 staff members. Her role includes external liaison with schools and parents, plus internal referrals to other professionals within the team. Linda has a large caseload and has some protected admin time, but has been struggling to maintain the level of record keeping expected and required. To help cope with this, she has been taking client records home with her to catch up on her record keeping and making referrals. Now, in the face of it, I think we can probably all sympathise with Linda, an experienced therapist, busy balancing a caseload with management duties as well, struggling to find the admin time that is needed. And that's without a new digital system to navigate and maybe even menopausal symptoms to boot. But we've got to think about what are the potential issues here, what are the concerns here. And the concerns that we can see is she's forgotten to make several referrals to other professionals. She actually left several client cases open following discharge from the service. Contact with parents and carers hadn't been recorded on Trust database and not recorded in a timely manner. And complaints have been received by multiple clients' families relating to several issues, including missed appointments. Now, Linda's line manager became aware of some of these issues and instigated capability procedures after some time, following which there had been some improvement, but she had been advised by HR that Linda did need to be referred to the HCPC Fitness to Practice team. So again, you could take this away, you could discuss it, thinking about what standards are potentially not being met here, and in relation to whether or not it should be a referral to HCPC. Again, it's based on a true case with us. So you can see there the standards that are not being kept here. She's forgotten to make several referrals to other professionals. Cases are being left open following discharge. She hasn't been completing all records promptly at all. Contact with parents wasn't completed in a timely manner or not completed even at all. She's been taking records home with her, which is obviously a real security risk there as well. And actually in the actual case, there were numerous failings across a significant number of service users. And a number of standards have been breached as well, in addition to a number of breaches of trust policies as well. So the panel in this case determined that the registrant's fitness to practice was currently impaired by reason of her misconduct, and in considering actions to be taken on her registration, a conditions of practice order was put in place. Again, felt to be appropriate because it addressed the concerns that had been proven. Now, the panel acknowledged that the registrant had not set out to cause harm, but the failings had occurred over a period of almost 12 months, and it had affected quite a number of service users who were vulnerable as well. So the panel was satisfied that the registrant didn't pose a risk of harm by being restricted in practice, because it was identified that the failings actually didn't relate to clinical decision making. It was more in relation to admin management of the patients. And you can go into different websites and things and follow these cases as well and just see a bit more detail behind it all. Now, another concern that has been raised to us is the inappropriate access of patient records, which is obviously a much bigger temptation with Encompass and a greater opportunity. And the GMC also gives a few helpful examples of this on their website. So here, where one doctor was suspended for 4 months in circumstances where he had access to patients' records without any clinical reason. He took photos of the records and he sent them to another person who was also not connected with the patient's care. Now, in respect of other patients, he took photos and sent them to another person, and this was over a period of 4 months. So the doctor was acting in an ill-judged attempt at humour and potentially subjected the patients to ridicule themselves. And the one patient actually who learnt of the disclosure was obviously very distressed by it. Another doctor accessed a record to get a mobile number. It came to light as they went on to send WhatsApp messages which were sexually motivated. And taken together with other serious allegations, that doctor was subsequently erased from the register. Now, some matters, like accidentally looking up a patient's record and then immediately closing it, is very unlikely to call into question anybody's practice or suggest impairment. But opening it, noting down the phone number of the service user and maybe calling them in a personal capacity is a serious breach of professional boundaries, which a panel would likely consider as capable of impairing practice. Now, even where a registrant does something wrong, like, so for example, sharing a patient's record without consent, well, if they demonstrate insight or awareness of what they've done and remediation, so that they've taken action maybe to address the failing or the mischief and show some remorse, well, this can support a finding of no current impairment, because it's always about the current impairment. So, for example, the registrant maybe has immediately rectified the issue, reported it, followed all applicable processes, they've shown remorse, completed a reflection, for example, and it hasn't happened again. So it is important that you only access the clinical information that you need and that you can justify the reasons for looking at this confidential information. It is a huge privilege and a responsibility to have all this access, and it must be treated with the respect that it warrants. So just a few resources for you. Now that you may have a refreshed maybe appreciation of the importance of good record keeping, can I encourage you just over the following weeks to follow up with the further resources that are available on our website here, such as the confidentiality one. The QR code will take you directly to that guidance, and discuss these with your teams as well. And you'll also see on our website, if you wanted to look through some case studies, which are always based on real cases. This one here relates to record keeping, and you could go through this maybe as part of CPD or again as a team meeting. Other regulators, as I've said, like the GMC, have cases that you can look up as well. And then remember the Good Management, Good Records resource by the Department of Health, and then the UK-wide Guide and Data Protection by the Information Commissioner's Office as well. I've already mentioned your professional body as a good place to go to if you haven't already read their guidance, and of course your own organisation's policies and procedures as well. So we'll just mention a couple of takeaway points here. Before I do, I wonder, would you mind just jumping onto this survey, if you can do that nice and quickly, and while you're listening to me finishing up here, and maybe just fill in some of your takeaways, because it's really useful for us. It's really useful for us as we go and we do other sessions like this today, or my colleagues across the water are doing it as well. It's good for us to know maybe what's outstanding as well for you. So if you don't mind completing that survey, that would be really helpful as we just think about maybe what takeaway points you might have. For many of you, I'm sure it's just a reminder, or hopefully maybe a bit of reassurance that actually you're doing everything okay in relation to what the HCPC needs. Record keeping, well, it may not be the first thing that you think about in relation to patient safety, but it is one of those additional responsibilities that you must fulfill as a professional. And like confidentiality or even professionalism or infection control, it is essential to do, and to do it well, to keep your service users safe. The need for records to be completed, it's a requirement of the HCPC standards of competency, performance and ethics, and your standards of proficiency as well. And meeting these standards promotes good, accurate communication between your colleagues, service users, and it promotes good care. Record keeping that doesn't meet these standards can have serious consequences for service users, but also for health and care professionals as well. And support and guidance on record keeping is available locally from your own organisation, from the HCPC, from professional bodies and national guidance as well. And any barriers and challenges, including service pressures, learning needs and/or health conditions, may impact on record keeping. And we need to be mindful of these, particularly as managers as well. So I just want to highlight to you our brand new data hub. It provides a large amount of information to you, all on various aspects of our work, so that we can all better understand the workforce across the UK. We can spot trends and we can better support the delivery of care at a local and a national level. So if you haven't checked that out, you might find that quite useful. A lot of useful information there, specifically as well to Northern Ireland. So you can check that out as well. And I just remind you then of the survey, and as well myself, you can see my email there. If you would like to get in contact in relation to the services that I can provide for you, just get in contact with me directly and we can talk about what I can do to help you. So thank you very much for listening. We finished up a bit earlier, so that always gives you an extra bit of admin time. And thank you very much again for joining us, and do get in touch. Thank you.